The National Organization for Women wishes to thank the Burger Marx Foundation for its generous grant of $5,000 to support conference workshops devoted to the discussion of organizing women workers, the strengthening of unions, and the mentoring of young activists focused on improving wages and working conditions for women. Please give a round of applause for the Burger Marx Foundation. The women's movement is on fire in 2012, and younger women are the flame. Woo! This is an Anita Hill moment for a new generation of feminists. And younger women are leading a new awakening for women's human rights. It is because of second-wave feminism and the legacy of the National Organization for Women that younger women have been born to believe that we should be treated as equals. It is because of second-wave feminism and the National Organization for Women that younger women know there is no freedom of religion when a woman is not free to act according to her own conscience. It is because of the National Organization for Women that younger women know there is no freedom in the marketplace when a woman is paid according to her gender rather than her contributions to society. It is because of the National Organization for Women that younger women know that there is absolutely no human right for men to control women. Now, those of you who know me, I'm not afraid to push the envelope, so I'm going to do it. It's younger women who are leading the modern women's movement online. And it is younger women who are leading the modern women's movement in the streets. It is younger women like Sandra Fluke, Krystal, and Tamika Mallory who are not waiting for permission to create the change we all wish to see. There is a generational shift taking place in feminism. It is real. It is a shift that is about perspective, and it is about power. Perspective and energy, earnestness of purpose, being told from birth that we are equal, being restrained by radical right-wing men who aren't willing to accept our presence and our intelligence, and then a willingness to try, be called a slut, and try again. Power of sharing and excitement that we are here, and we can launch slut walks and take away Rush Limbaugh's advertisers. And demand full abortion funding from all levels of government, whether or not the established chains of command think it is the right wording, the right tactic, the right time. A willingness to demand that just as a great president of the United States must evolve to stand publicly for every person's right to live and love, so too a great organization must evolve to champion young women leading the women's movement forward without its tutelage. So too a great organization must evolve to celebrate young women leading the movement forward without its direct instruction. We should be so inspired to hear from the young feminist leaders who will speak now. First up is a woman who, I'm going to say it, we should all encourage to run for President of the United States. But before we do that, we're not going to let you speak first because we need to give you an award. So I want you to please give a hand to our wonderful president of our organization, the National Organization for Women, Terry O'Neill, who will introduce Sandra by presenting her with a much-deserved award. Thank you.
thanks, Erin. And thanks to all of the amazing women who are up here today. Sandra, I'm really thrilled to be giving you this award. Tamika, you and I have been at rallies, we have been at conventions, we are walking together, we are marching together, it's been wonderful. And Krystal, you've just been fabulous. MSNBC is my favorite, very favorite channel. Thank you for all you're doing. A few short months ago, Sandra Fluke was a third-year law student at Georgetown University Law Center. She was a woman of accomplishment. Among other things, she had been president of the Georgetown Law Students for Reproductive Justice. And before she even went to law school, she co-founded the New York statewide Coalition for Fair Access to Family Court, which successfully lobbied for legislation that would allow LGBTQ, teen, and other survivors of intimate partner violence to access protective orders. But when Representative Darrell Issa, chair of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, called a hearing for the purpose of sputtering and railing against the Obama administration's inclusion of contraception in the list of preventive health care services that insurance companies must cover without co-pays, Mr. Issa actually banned Sandra Fluke from testifying at his hearing. Here's how Mr. Issa describes this accomplished young woman. Quote, a college student who appears to have become energized over this issue, who is not appropriate or qualified to testify about contraceptive coverage, who does not have, quote, the appropriate credentials to speak at a committee hearing on birth control. Because according to Mr. Issa, the issue of contraceptive coverage in health insurance plans is not about women. It's about the religious freedom of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Now, as we all know, a firestorm of protest erupted over this. Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi arranged a forum in which Sandra would be able to present her testimony. And at that forum, Representative Elijah Cummings asked her directly. He said, Ms. Fluke, what can you tell us? What is it that makes you qualified to speak to the issue of contraceptive coverage? And Sandra, I saw the video of this, Sandra looks directly at the panel and she says, I am an American woman who uses birth control. And that said it all. With that one simple, dignified response, Sandra Fluke claimed power for every single woman in the United States. Because what she was signaling to us all is that any time we are affected by policies of powerful elites, we have a right to speak and to be heard. Now, Sandra's claim to power scared a lot of people. It really, really scared Rush Limbaugh. And you know, Rush Limbaugh is not just any blowhard. Extremist right-wing radio host. In fact, Rush Limbaugh is one of the most feared power brokers in the entire Republican Party today. And that comes not from any left-wing person, that comes from a Republican Party operative who worked in the George W. Bush White House, saying that Rush Limbaugh is in fact a feared power broker throughout the Republican Party. Now, mighty Rush Limbaugh was so upset by the fact of Sandra Fluke speaking truth to power that he decided he was going to take her down. He claimed that Sandra's advocacy for contraceptive coverage made her a slut and a prostitute. He said she was having so much sex that she needs a whole lot of contraception and she wants other people to pay for it.
Go, girl.
So think about that. Mighty Rush Limbaugh doesn't seem to understand. The birth control pill is not like Viagra. You don't take a birth control pill just before having sex. Like, oh, never mind. Sandra Fluke was not cowed by Limbaugh's relentless 3-day defamatory character assassination. In fact, just the opposite happened. Women and men around the country were disgusted by Limbaugh, and in short order, he lost nearly 100% of his national advertising. All of you, join me in honoring this amazing champion, this role model, now's 2012 woman of courage.
Thank you so much for that very warm and lively welcome. I love speaking to a room full of my kind of women. Not staying in their seats and not staying quiet during comments, it's excellent. So I have to say thank you so very much to Terry and to all of you and to Now for recognition of what I've done in this way. But I have to say that I feel less like a woman of courage and more like a woman who knows how to follow a good model, because I'm sure every young feminist in this country has learned so much from the trails that so many of the women in this room blazed. So I want to say thank you for all that you have done for me, for other women my age, and all that you continue to do. So thank you very much. And I especially want to say thanks for having my back the last few months. There were a lot of people who spoke out on my behalf, and that's really what made it possible for me to do what I did in terms of trying to frame the conversation and trying to say some important things in the wake of this situation. And Now and also Ms. Krystal were two of the loudest voices in that effort, in really trying to support me and support this conversation, and I thank you so very much. And I think what was so fantastic about the last few months and the energy that we have seen is that it has been around a lot of young women getting involved. Not just young women, but really many young women stepping to the fore. And I really want to say thank you to Erin and how she introduced this, because it's not about young women becoming more active. There are some of my generation who really did have this assumption that we lived in a post-feminist world, and I think they've awakened from that delusion, hopefully. But there are many, many young women who have already been engaging and been active and really working on these issues, and the last few months have been, I think, a lot about making that visible and having that be seen by the country, that feminism is alive and well in this country, and young women are active and empowered and really working hard on these issues. So with that, I think I'll transition into what we're speaking about for the rest of our time here today, which is young women organizing and young feminists organizing. And I have to say that I probably share this feeling with my other panelists, that it's a little odd for each of us to try to say, what are young women organizing about, what are we working on, because we could turn to so many of the young women in this room and say, well, tell us what you're working on. I think that's one of the beautiful and powerful things about young women's activism and young feminist activism, is that it's not focused on one single issue. These are young feminists who are empowered to work on a whole variety of things, and we're going out and working on them in tandem and in spreading on the web and just doing it all in so many different ways. So I'll say a little bit about a few of the things that I'm excited about, and I know we will as well, but there's really so much happening. So one of the things that happens when Daryl Issa calls you a college student and Rush Limbaugh calls you a co-ed is that you suddenly get tapped as being several years younger than you actually are. So I've spent the last few months trying to figure out how to be young and hip and cooler than I ever was. So my stereotypical approach to young feminist organizing is Twitter, right? So today I tweeted out and asked, young feminists what I should talk about in terms of what we were doing, what we were working on, and what we were organizing about. And of course, I got back a few of the responses, the things that have been in the news lately, which are absolutely really important. Things like equal pay and healthcare and the just tragic but temporary closing, because it's going to be temporary, of the clinic in Mississippi, the last clinic that was providing abortions in Mississippi.
Thank you.
And of course, reproductive choice in a lot of other flavors. So they're certainly active on those issues that have been the headlines of the day, but I know that Krystal's going to talk about some of those, and I'm sure Tamika will as well. I'm not going to do the whole thing, you better just And they also tweeted back something that I think has really been highlighted the last few months as we've seen male lawmakers deny me a seat at the table that day and deny all of us a voice in some of those conversations. And of course what we saw in Michigan with the lawmakers not being allowed to speak there as well. They tweeted back, and these are quotes now, so they'll be in Twitter speak. Let's stop asking men to vote the way we want. Put women in power in 2012. I think Boehner sold cars. We can do much better. And the next woman tweeted, we need more young women to get off the sidelines and run for office. And this one said, electing women who don't quit because they have children, leaving us stuck with yet another good old boy white man. So I'm gonna reframe that as a call for work-family balance and support for working women and women in office. And they also tweeted to me about some of the things that I think really do move young feminists, which were, one woman said, I think body rights and body image are the two major issues for women. Another said, acceptance and consideration for trans women and non-gender conforming folks. And a third said, trans women acceptance in mainstream feminist movement. Yes. And then here's an email from my mom, so I'm going to skip that one. And then this woman said to me, most young women I know are not engaged in women's issues to the depth and the breadth that my gender, the baby boomers, were. Why is that? And I don't know that I have the answer. Actually, I know for sure that I don't have the answer to that very big question that I think a lot of us have been thinking about and struggling with for some time. But I think perhaps one thing that could help us to overcome this is that I think maybe young feminists and young people who aren't engaged in the feminist movement see things through a slightly different lens. I think a lens of gender equality might be one that works better in talking to that generation. And I know that everyone in this room understands a gender equality lens and understands that issues like body image and trans folks and gender identity are issues that affect men as well as women, and that's always what this movement has stood for, is thinking about the ways that these issues affect all of our members of our families, not just women. But I think that may be something that we need to think about in our messaging and in our language when we talk to young people. Because organizations like NOW have done such a fabulous job in breaking down barriers for women that I think the young women don't feel necessarily that it's about being a woman that is the problem. They don't feel the discrimination so pressured, so coherently that it was in past generations. But I think they do see things like that they're not free to express their gender identity in whatever way they want to. And that perhaps their male siblings or peers are not free to express themselves. And I think that is one of the ways that this generation can be appealed to, is to think about gender equality and breaking down the barriers that hurt all of us, and thinking about it in those terms, framing it that way, because we know that that's a frame that all of the issues we've always worked on fit into. And I absolutely do not mean that we should in any way discard any of the things we're working on, or the feminist identity, or any of that. But I do think we have to make sure to explain our movement and explain our issues in a way that appeals to this generation and how they feel about the world and what's happening. So that's my stab at wisdom. I'm sure that it will fall short in some ways.
Now, for those of you who don't know Krystal Ball, another major inspiration for young women and young people. She made it safe for the Facebook generation to run for office. She is the new MSNBC co-host of the brand new show, The Cycle. She's a political writer, she's an activist, and she's a former congressional candidate. If you're not on Twitter, you've got to get on Twitter and you've got to start following Krystal, because she is so active in combating media misogyny. And she was among the first to call for a boycott of our, I guess I shouldn't say friend, our long-term acquaintance, Rush Limbaugh's advertisers, following his long smear of Sandra. By the way, Rush said he was going to leave the country if the Affordable Care Act was upheld. Is he left? So, talk about walking the walk here. Krystal, in 2010, she was endorsed by Virginia Now, and she survived a very tough primary to become the Democratic nominee for U.S. Congress from the 1st District of Virginia. And I remember going to a younger women's event that Krystal was at when she was running, and I know you met a ton of people then, so I don't expect you to remember. But she talked about how people told her, you know, you've got to cut your hair, and you shouldn't talk about being a mom. And she said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And I just think she is so cool. Well, she didn't successfully unseat the Republican incumbent. Her campaign raised nearly $1 million from more than 6,000 donors. Following her congressional campaign, Krystal was named by Forbes magazine as number 21 on the magazine's most powerful women of the midterm elections list. The Week magazine has also rated her as one of the top 8 political stars of 2010. We are so excited to have Krystal with us today.
I just have to take a minute to say how cool it is to be in this room with this group of ladies and the men who support those ladies, and with Sandra, who really did inspire a lot of the work that I did this year. So to be on a panel with Sandra talking about young women organizing is just, it's actually a little surreal. So thank you now for giving me that opportunity, and Erin and Terry and all of you for being here. I really, really appreciate it. I wanted to start with one of my favorite quotes to sort of set the scene, from Alice Walker, author of The Color Purple. She says, "The most common way that people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any." And I know that I'm preaching to the choir in this room. This is a group of women who know they are powerful and are not afraid to use that power. But I think it serves as a reminder for perhaps why some in our generation have been less engaged. They've been taught by our political system to think that they don't have any power. Now, there's 2 ways to look at what's happened this year. There's the pessimistic way, and I know you all are familiar with the stats. I mean, we've had, in 2011, over 1,100 provisions introduced in state legislatures nationwide telling women what they can and can't do with their lives and their bodies. A record number. We've had unbelievable assaults on Planned Parenthood. We had 7 states in 2011 either defund or massively cut the funding to Planned Parenthood. We have another 8 states in 2012 that are considering doing the same. We have Texas, which has decided that they would rather their women, their low-income women, not have preventative well women care at all than partner with Planned Parenthood in that program. We have the horrible situation in Mississippi, where the one remaining clinic is in danger of closing, but hopefully going to be coming back. We've had transvaginal probes in my home state of Virginia. So those negative things are one way to look at this year. But there's another way to look at this year. We also had Komen for the Cure make a horrific decision in ending their partnership with Planned Parenthood. But that wasn't the end of the story, as you all remember. We then had people, men, women, young and old, across the country saying, this is not okay with us. Yeah. Speaking out through traditional means and also online, and we saw a change. We also had, in Virginia, when Bob McDonnell and the Republican legislature tried to go way too far and say not only are we going to have mandatory ultrasounds, a medically unnecessary procedure, we are actually going to force state-mandated transvaginal probes on the population, women and men across the country also said, hold on a second, this is way too far. And while we still have now mandatory ultrasounds in the state, we at least got that part stripped down. And we had a personhood bill that was sent back to committee. So we had victories there as well. And then Ms. Sandra Fluke came around. And I have to say, what is wrong with Daryl Issa? Honestly, like, what is wrong with that guy? So Sandra comes along. And you know what? When Rush Limbaugh attacked her on day one, I'm ashamed to say that his bar of obnoxiousness is set so low that I just thought of slut, prostitute, you know, typical Rush, right? It really didn't inspire me to action. It was on day 2 when he called for Sandra's sex tapes to be posted online for the titillation of himself that I finally said, you know what, we can't stand for this any longer. And I mean, it's kind of a funny thing how this started. I am lucky, as you know, to have a relationship with MSNBC, to have a new show. And at that time, I was doing a guest appearance on Martin Bashir's show. And it was right after Rush Limbaugh's program had ended. So our segment was supposed to be about something else, and it ended up being about Sandra and Rush. And after the segment, Martin actually said to me, you know what, Krystal, you're really passionate about this, and you should write something about it. I said, you know what, that's a good idea, I think I will. So I went home and I started writing. And as I was writing and digging up all these old, horrific, unbelievable quotes from Rush Limbaugh, I just kept getting more and more upset. So in the middle of writing, I took a break and I went online to Twitter, and I started talking to some of my friends about what had happened and what was going on, and I just realized that there was this incredible passion and anger out there at what he had said and what he had done. At some point in this Twitter conversation, someone suggested to me, why don't we boycott Rush Limbaugh sponsors? And I thought, you know what, that's a great idea, because just talking about this guy, that's exactly what he wants. We have to go after him in a way that will be meaningful to him. So that night, I wrote my piece. It was called Boycott Rush. The next day, a friend and myself launched a petition called Boycott Rush. And by the end of that day, and this was one of many efforts, by the way, going on across the country, but by the end of the next day, sponsors were already starting to drop from this program. And by the end of 24 hours, we had over 100,000 signatures on that petition. Wow. And the pace of advertisers dropping didn't slow, it quickened. Until, as Terry said, he literally was on his flagship station in New York. He was having to play dead airtime because they did not have, even the public service announcements that are free wouldn't play on his airwaves. Tries to play this off like it's no big deal. But you will notice that he still talks about it a lot. He's still one of the radio stations that carries his program on only a few networks and is publicly traded, had to come out and give their financial results. And they said they have literally lost millions because of carrying Rush Limbaugh. And the main carrier of the Limbaugh program, which carries him on many other stations, is not publicly traded, so we don't have insight directly into their financials. But we can assume, based on what Cumulus Media has said, that they are also being financially impacted by Rush Limbaugh's obnoxious, misogynistic, racist, hate media. This is a guy who has never been held to account. Never. So after the initial cable news wave crusted and fell and we went on to Donald Trump's fundraiser or whatever was next, there was a little bit of a quiet period. And normally what happens with these things is everybody kind of moves on to whatever's next. And what I'm really excited about and want to kind of focus on in these comments is that in the Stop Rush movement, that didn't happen. We actively worked to gather all the efforts that were going on independently, all the different petitions and people who had become engaged in this cause in different ways. And we actually had volunteers, completely on their own time, build a website, stoprush.net, where people could go to see what sponsors were still with Rush, in what markets, are they national sponsors, are they local sponsors. Volunteers could sign up to listen, God help them, to his program, and track who is still with Rush so that we would have a database and be able to coordinate action on a local and a national level. You know, it's an incredible thing. It works actually quite well, and I'm really proud to have been a part of this effort. And it's ongoing and it's continuing, and the pressure is continuing to be applied. So I think the model of people across the country having an emotional reaction, coming together and finding each other online, and then actually building something and building a movement, nobody being paid, completely volunteer. I think it's an incredible thing, and I think it's a really positive thing, and I think it's exactly what Alice Walker had in mind when she said we have to understand that we have power. You know, despite the money in politics, despite the rigged system that is so frustrating, ultimately, whether it's Rush Limbaugh or Darrell Issa or John Boehner or Mitt Romney, they are accountable to the people, and we do have that power. So one issue that I just want to quickly highlight, because there's a lot of fights out there, as we know. There's a lot of things to work on. But one thing that I really think we need to be aware of is, I have to say, I was delighted and ecstatic by the Supreme Court's decision this week. But within that decision comes a challenge. The Supreme Court has said that states can now opt out of expanding Medicaid coverage to 133% of the poverty line. So what that means is, if you have a state, let's take Texas for example, where 6 million Texans are uninsured, highest rate in the country, a quarter of their residents don't have health insurance. If they went with the Affordable Care Act and expanded Medicaid coverage up to 133%, it would cover 2 million more Texans, 2 million. And for the first years, it would be 100% of the federal government expense. Going forward, it would be at 90% of federal government expense. So if Texas decides, you know, in their Texas way that they do sometimes, that they're not going to go with the program, those 2 million people won't be insured, and yet they won't qualify for the subsidies in the Affordable Care Act to help them be able to afford insurance on their own. So we'll literally have a situation where the poorest people, the people who are in the most need, will be totally left out in the cold. Bobby Jindal has already said in Louisiana that he is not, in his state, going to go with the Medicaid expansion. And you can imagine that a lot of these Republicans are going to make this a litmus issue, so that any Republican who has national ambitions will have their feet held to the fire to also say they're not going to go forward with the Medicaid expansion unless people like us get energized And we hold their feet to the fire and say, you are not going to leave 2 million Texas residents out in the cold. You are not going to do this to us. Okay, that's our responsibility. We have to make it a political winner to implement this change and provide health care to literally millions of Americans. That, I think, is a big fight that we have to start planning for and taking on right now. The last thing that I want to say. So some of my friends in the room know that my favorite Dr. Seuss story is The Lorax. I do have a 4-year-old daughter, and I took her to the movie, and I was blown away. It's amazing. Everybody should see it. It's revolutionary. But it really is. It truly is. Read the book if you don't have time for the movie. Anyway, so I want to actually close with my favorite lines from The Lorax, because I think it is a call to action. And all that the Lorax left here in this mess was a small pile of rocks with one word, unless. Whatever that meant, well, I just couldn't guess. That was long, long ago, but each day since that day, I've sat here and worried away. Through the years, while my buildings have fallen apart, I've worried about it with all of my heart. But now, said the Onceler, now that you're here, the words of the Lorax seem perfectly clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, who I'm so glad are here, let's get fired up, let's work, let's organize, let's fight. Thank you.
So much inspiration. Can we handle it? Are we fired up? All right. Well, I'm really excited to introduce Tamika Mallory. Tamika Mallory, look at her. She is leading at the top, one of the nation's top civil rights organizations. She is the Executive Director of the National Action Network. She has been a member of National Action Network since it was formed in 1991. She is the youngest National Executive Director in the group's history. How old are you, Tamika? 32. Tamika has worked closely with the Obama administration on civil rights issues, including education, equal rights for women, healthcare reform, healthcare reform, gun violence, and police misconduct. Recently, Tamika was named one of the Grios.com's 100 future leaders. I don't even know what that means. She's a leader today. She sits on News Corp's Diversity Advisory Council and is a board member of Youth in Action. Please give the warmest round of applause for Tamika Mallory.
Thank you so much, Erin. I feel like I have absolutely nothing to say after these two wonderful women came before me. Everything that I was thinking to say to you all has already been said, so I'll try to figure out something to take my seat quickly. I want to thank Terry O'Neill, the wonderful president of the National Organization for Women, for including me in this amazing, amazing conference. And of course to Erin, who is a fireball, our young leader in her own right. Thank you so much, Erin. To Sandra Fluke, you are truly an inspiration. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. You know, I think all of us here look at you as a trailblazer and an example that you cannot be afraid to stand up and to speak out. And your work will inspire us all for a long, long time to come. So thank you for just being you. Thank you. And Krystal is also a staff member at MSNBC along with my boss, the Reverend Al Sharpton. She's fierce, a wonderful woman who I watch all the time. I kind of go and watch what Krystal is saying so I can get my stuff in order and know what I gotta move on. But as the 32-year-old female national executive director of the Reverend Al Sharpton's organization, his baby, that he started 21 years ago, we are very serious about the hostile environment that is really upon women across this country and across the world. Women all over are suffering with so many issues, and we take it very, very seriously and work really hard at trying to make changes. As a woman myself, you know, I'm in front of the issues, and every time we do a conference or have a conversation anywhere, if there's all men on the list, you will see me being the one to say, wait a minute, you know, there's got to be a woman who is an expert on this issue as well. And everybody goes, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. You know, absolutely. And you know, so I have really been the trailblazer there. But what we realize is with all the issues that we're facing, all the things that we're going through, courage and activism are the only two things that we need to get by. We can win if we're active and if we have courage, because it's not easy. So we've got to stand up and be willing to jump across those hurdles and use the strength of our sisters and our brothers to get us through. And that is sort of the model that our organization lives with, that we can do anything with courage and activism. Now, most of you know Reverend Al. As I said, he's the host of Politics Nation on MSNBC. He's also a radio host on the radio 7 days a week. He's the hardest working man in the civil rights movement after Dr. King, I have to tell you. You may know him from the Trayvon Martin case, where he really was the leading force in helping to bring that case to the forefront. He's worked, you know, many, many years on police brutality and police misconduct, and as a matter of fact, he's actually in Los Angeles right now preaching the funeral of Rodney King. And then you also may know him for his recent work on voting rights, which I think is probably the 21st civil rights issue, the civil rights issue of the 21st century, along with education and a bunch of other stuff. But the voting rights issue is very, very critical, because everything that we are upset about, everything we're mobilized around, will really be determined by what happens with this election and with one's ability to take away our right to vote. So that is an issue that he is all over. But I want to put a little bit of context around why I'm here and why I am the National Executive Director of a civil rights organization. And I don't know any organization, civil rights organization, that has a young woman who's #2 to the president. And it's a tall order, let me tell you. Because people look at Reverend Sharpton one way, and then they see me come through the door, and it's like, oh, you know, she's a woman, she's going to be a feminist, she's going to be telling us what to do for girls, because people just don't, you know, necessarily want to hear it. So it certainly is a tall order for me. But just to tell you a little bit about myself, I have literally been an activist since I was a toddler. My parents helped to start National Action Network 21 years ago. So I have been at every rally, every protest, every demonstration. And I was a kid that used to be at the rallies, and my parents would lose me in the crowd of 20 to 30,000 people. But they didn't worry, because they knew somebody would bring me to the end of the march. Really, truly a young toddler activist. And, you know, through all of those things, it was really instilled in me that equal rights is a civil right. Equal rights is a civil right. But to go even further than that, my mother was kept happy by everyone in the house. Everybody in our whole family, as a matter of fact, knew not to mess with her. Because if she was upset, the whole family felt the wrath of her being upset. So you just did whatever she said. And I remember when I was a kid, I used to go to my dad and say, Dad, you know, Mom, she's doing such and such thing, and can you help me? And he would go, oh, no. Do whatever it is that your mother wants you to do. And the thing that I learned from that at a young age is that being an activist and a strong woman can move mountains. We can do so much. So I'm in the civil rights movement, and I hope that all of us who are here today can embrace the whole thought of us just being ignited, being fired up, being ready to work. Over these next few months, we've got some real important work to do. And we've got to really have that energy to run the next course. And we've got to do it together. You know, the one thing about women is we push one another along. You know, you can call your sister and your fellow woman on the job or wherever and say, I just need a little bit of encouragement. And we will help you get to the next place. And what they say, behind every man, every powerful man is a strong woman. So we have the energy that we need, but we've just got to kick it up and be reignited, just be reorganized, you know, to do the work that is necessary at this time. I would talk quickly about a few points, and I think the most important thing that I can say today is that activism is really what we need to be focused on. You know, it is not enough to sit back and look at the television and say, you know, I'm mad, I can't believe that, look at that. What are you going to do about it? You know, what are you going to do in your area, in your hometown, where you live, to make the change? So activism is truly the only thing that we can really use. And I have to keep saying that, because not everybody who, and I think I'm preaching to the choir, because all of you who are here, I'm sure, are very strong activists in your own right. But sometimes, you know, we can get into one little area and say we're going to work on education, or we're going to just focus on this small thing. And that is important, because the small things make up the big picture. But true activism means that sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone and go and support someone else in what they're doing. You don't necessarily have to be the leader, but you got to be there as a supporter. So I think it's safe to say today that we all know we're here to talk about how to make us more effective, because all of us are doing something, right? So how do we become more effective? And I also think it's safe to say that we understand the context sort of what activism was, the historical context, what people have done, like Sojourner Truth and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Gloria Steinem and Rosa Parks and all these great women who came before us, and what they did to get us to this place. But what does it mean to be an activist today? What are the pressing issues? What are the key issues that we must tackle today? So what does activism mean? Let's talk about one of the most recent issues where you saw our activism work. And that is, just recently, the Affordable Health Care Act being upheld, right? So we know we did that. Why? Because when the president was running, we said we want health care. We want it to be fair. We want it to be equal, and we want to get rid of the discriminatory practices of healthcare in this country. That's what we want. We said it, we meant it, and the president said he would do it, and he did. So that's the first level of how our activism works. The second thing we did was, when he got in, we reminded him, don't forget, you remember you promised us healthcare, and he did it. And that's a form of activism. But the third thing is, once it was under siege, and once we felt like it may not actually come through, we went to the Supreme Court, we rallied, we organized, we wrote, we blogged, we tweeted, excuse me. We did everything that we needed to do. And I don't think that the Supreme Court's decision was based upon that. But I certainly know that it was a sign that the American people, and particularly women, we wanted it. We wanted to have affordable health care for us, and we wanted to have it to be, again, a non-discriminatory practice. And so it happened. And that was through true activism. So what does that mean today? It means we've got to look at other issues and do the same exact thing. So right now, we're talking about this whole wage income gap. And the fact that we're demanding that there's parity in America. Because why is it that we are also the breadwinners of our households? A lot of times, and I'm sorry, the men that are in the room, but it's very true. If a woman doesn't bring home a good paycheck, the household will fail. I know it certainly is that way in the African American community. You need to have two people in the house making ends meet. And so we're also the breadwinners. We're also taking care of our children, single moms. I'm sure many of you are here in this room. Why are we getting paid 77 cents to the dollar that a man is making? Why? And to go even further than that, a Black and Latino woman is making 61 cents to every dollar. Now in 1963, let me just make sure I get this right, the Equal Pay Act was signed by President Kennedy. And so the 77 cents now is only 17 cents more than what it was in 1963. Not really a big deal, but that means it was 60 cents, right, at that time. Well, now, women of color are making 61 cents, so there really has been no progress at all in that area. So a woman who is as qualified or more qualified cannot get paid the same thing that a man is getting paid. That's an issue that we have to tackle together right now. And we can't wait and say we're going to do it by and by. We've got to do it together. Now, as they would say at the Now Conference. The next thing is the Violence Against Women Act being reauthorized and making sure that people of color, immigrants, the LGBT community, and Native Americans are a part of it. And then we have this thing that, you know, is very personal to me, and that's the violence, drugs, and crime within our young people on the streets of America. Very serious. We are caught up in, we've got to feed hungry children, we've got to fight for education, for equal education opportunities, we've got to do all of that. And we somehow turn our eyes at the fact that our children have access to guns and drugs. My son's father, my son is 13 years old, believe it or not, and his father was murdered when he was 2. And it is nothing like telling my son every time he gets upset that, you know, I'm just so sorry. He was a victim to the street, and it's just me and you know, and there are others that are involved in his life, but there's nothing like your mother and your father, your mommy and your daddy, you know. And so while we're worrying about all these other things, our children are crying out for us to focus on the fact that they're in pain, and therefore they're killing each other. It's a sense of cannibalism that's happening within our young people because they're getting ignored in the process of us focusing on the big picture and not zeroing in on what they're going through. The drugs are just a form of them trying to cover up the pain that they're feeling. And that's something else that we've got to look at and fight for our children's lives on a more specific basis. What can we do to help them stop killing themselves? That's another issue. I'm almost done. I've got 2 more important points. Voting. I talked about that in the beginning. Very important. National Action Network just launched a voting engagement tour where we're going all over this country ensuring that every single vote will count. We're trying to help people get their IDs. We're trying to make sure that they know they need an ID, because a lot of states, people don't even have a clue that there's a law that has been passed in their state. And nobody's trying to get them that information either. So we're there trying to make sure that we establish groups on the ground, make sure that the elderly community, the youth, the churches are all organized to help people go out and get their IDs and also to register to vote. That is an issue, an activist issue that we must be engaged in. And how do you do it? You don't necessarily have to be involved in a widespread program. You can literally just call your family members in particular states and tell them that you need to pay attention to the fact that you need a new ID, you may not have the proper identification, and grandma needs also to find her birth certificate so she can get the proper state ID. Do you know that in Texas, you can use your gun license, but you can't use your student ID to vote? It's crazy, crazy. But people in Texas don't know. So if you know people in Texas, you've got to be an activist and call them and let them know what's going on and help them get organized to get what they need. That's another issue. Finally, we all must work together on working rights and immigrant rights. I'll tell you a quick funny story and then I'll take my seat. This March, well, first of all, it was in February, Reverend Sharpton calls me up and says, we're going to walk 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery. It was great after I did it. But we're going to walk from Selma to Montgomery, and we're going to reenact the 1963 march on in Alabama, where the Voting Rights March. We're going to you know, go out and we're gonna organize labor, we're gonna get people together and we're gonna walk. Now, I wear 5-inch Prada shoes on a regular basis, like I'm sure many of you do. And I was thinking to myself, what is gonna happen? It was the first time in my life where breaking my leg was okay. Like I just wanted to break it the day before and just lay down and say, sorry, you know, but I'll watch you guys on TV. And Terry O'Neill was there and walked with us. But after we got on the walk, it just got easier. It didn't even feel, there was no pain. We just kept walking and talking and organizing and feeling this sense of love and unity. We slept together on cots in a church. And because there was no hotel, back in the day when Dr. King did it, there was no hotel. So we really, I was like, Reverend Sharpton, we're really gonna do it just like they did it? Like, there's no shuttle service and hotel? And he's like, no, we're really gonna sleep on a cot in a church. But it was great because I got to connect with people from Ohio and Wisconsin and other places that I would never have met, and we would never have had our guards down enough to talk to one another and be real. So on this walk, we kept pushing one another along, saying, I know you're tired, but we can continue to do that. And I think that that is my closing message for all of you today. We've got to not only be activists, but we've got to love each other more. We've got to put our petty differences aside. Look at one another in the eye and say, I love you regardless of the fact that I don't like you, I don't like your hair, I don't like your dress, I don't like your size, I don't like all of those things. But I love you because you're another human being. And obviously God had a purpose for you. If we can do that, if we can unite around love and activism, we can change the whole world. So once we get past that, once we get past our issues, what will happen is you will begin to see that our children and other people will respect us because they're looking for the greatness that's within us, but we are just not always displaying it. So my call to action today is while you're being an activist, be a lover, be a sister, be a brother to your sister, be all those different things. Because with that, with love and activism, we truly can make a difference. We've done it before, we can do it again, and we can continue to make the necessary change in this country that will ensure that generations to come will have what they need to survive. Let's not just talk about it, though. Let's be about it when we walk away from this conference today. Thank you all so very much.
So, in closing, what I'd love to do is talking about younger women organizing. I want to acknowledge all of the younger women in this room. It's not just the people on the stage. You know, in 2006, I actually was in the National Now Action Center when Betty Friedan died. It was a Young Feminist Task Force meeting at the time that we were having it, and I remember holding a moment of silence. And that round of applause just felt like a wonderful moment of breaking the silence. So thank you so very much.